Well, welcome everyone. I'm really happy for you to join us today. My name is Marc-Andre Pigeon. I am the director for the Canadian Centre for Study Co-operatives, and it's my great pleasure to be here today with Bob Fink from the United Farmers of Alberta. Bob, welcome. It's really a pleasure to have you here today. Can you tell us a bit about who you are, your role at UFA, and how you came into this role?
Well, thanks, Marc-Andre. I'm the Chief Corporate Affairs Officer at UFA, and what that actually means is I oversee a number of functions that report into me, including our governance function, which includes our board and delegate matters. I oversee member relations, our government relations, legal, community investment, marketing, communications, support services, which now includes our business support, data support, and our contact center. And I've actually had HR added to my portfolio just a couple of years ago as well. So I do a lot of the back office stuff is what I tell people.
Right. It sounds like you have a lot of free time on your hands.
Exactly, especially during the pandemic, being in charge of HR and communications, it's a lot.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine. You and I had exchanged some emails, and it was very clear, even in the emails, that you were kind of really working very, very hard and long days just to keep up. So what has it been like? What has UFA's experience been like? Maybe you tell people a little bit about what UFA is too, just before you launch into that, because as someone who's from Eastern Canada, and you'll know this from personal conversations we've had, it's still a bit of a vague thing for me, and so I don't know if many people outside of Alberta would really know what UFA is. So maybe you can tell us a bit about it.
Sure. Yeah, UFA is a 111-year-old farmer-owned agricultural cooperative. We have over 110,000 active members, and we have a very diverse business. Our petroleum business includes 113 bulk fuel and cardlock locations, and we're throughout Alberta, eastern BC, and western Saskatchewan. Our agribusiness includes 34 farm and ranch supply stores, which is our largely our retail presence, and we supply product and services in both the crop and livestock areas, as well as providing bins and building solutions.
So I'm going to ask a question that will betray again my ignorance. When I came to Western Canada, people kept referring to these card locks, and I had no idea what they were talking about. Bob, can you just, again, this is just for people who aren't from this part of the world, what is a card lock?
Well, a card lock is essentially a gas station. It's very similar to a gas station. It's just that you need a card in order to obtain the fuel. So you have to be a member, and you have to have appropriate credit and all of that with us. So
self-serve, right? It's purely self-serve, basically.
Yeah, it is self-serve. We do have stores on site, and you can come into the store and we'll sell you whatever you need, sort of the lubricants or washer fluid or you name it, right?
Right. So now, Bob, let's get back to the kind of the purpose of our conversation. I just wanted to make sure people understood a little bit about UFA before we got too far in it. What has the experience been like? So with these ag members, you got 100,000+ members. What's the experience been like through this crisis?
Yeah, so we've actually implemented an extensive pandemic plan over the last few weeks. We luckily had many elements of a business continuity plan and an emergency response plan in place. So when COVID-19 hit, we were fairly well prepared. You can never prepare for something like this, though. I mean, this is a pandemic, and it's different than other business continuity type issues. But by following what we had in place, we at least were able to get off to a very quick start. We also actually initially benefited from an initial scare in our CSO building. We had a contractor of a subtenant that his father had been traveling recently, and he was initially one of the early people identified as potentially having COVID-19. So we ended up having to lock down our building almost immediately, get everybody out, cleanse the building. We actually shut it down for a few days, and thankfully the test came back negative. We decided to, at that point in time, remain remote. And so we were able to it kind of kickstarted us actually down the pandemic plan route very early on. We also actually had a similar situation in one of our farm stores where somebody had been recently traveling, came back, was displaying symptoms, and it required us to take similar actions in the farm store: shut it down, cleanse it, disinfect it, and then reopen a couple days later. And it gave us sort of some early learnings in the process, and really sort of catapulted our response. After those sort of initial scares, we've been working along the pandemic plan. We have been identified as an essential service in all the provinces that we operate in. We provide fuel solutions and agribusiness solutions, and travel and supply chain needs to be filled, and obviously food needs to be put on the plate for people. So thankfully we remain open throughout this. We actually have a very diverse business as well, as you can tell, with the petroleum side and the agribusiness side and the buildings. So our planning has had to be fluid and adaptable to a wide variety of circumstances and locations. Our farm and ranch store playbook, for instance, is very different than the playbooks at our UFA-owned corporate sites, or a non-owned petroleum agency, or our fertilizer plants, or an ag depot, or even in our Calgary support office or our distribution center. And with our geography, all of our sites are varying sizes and have different staffing levels. And that also added to the complexity of the response. And I thought I'd walk you through a couple of our playbooks just to sort of illustrate that complexity.
That'd be great. Thank you. Yeah.
On the farm and ranch store side, obviously as an essential service, we need to remain open. So our goal has been to protect our employees and our members and our customers. And so our playbook includes a one-time paid sick leave program, which was brand new for frontline hourly staff. So they're allowed to take up to 10 days paid if they get ill, and we've had a number of staff take advantage of that. Thankfully, there's been no illnesses, no confirmed COVID cases yet in our sites, but that is available to them. We've increased pay for our frontline staff to recognize the risk that they're facing every day in dealing with the public. We've introduced regular communications and information, particularly on mental health, because this is as much a mental health crisis as it is a pandemic. We've been requiring employees to work from their home office where they can, and that's even including office staff in the country. We've introduced increased cleaning and disinfecting regimes in our stores. We've limited product for sale, such as our cleaning supplies and pet food, which were in high demand at the outset. And particularly the pet food was a bit of a surprise to us. But in a pandemic, people worry about their animals. So, and our farmers and ranchers are no different.
So these are, Bob, can I just stop you there? They're pets. These
Sure.
are not the farm animals per se. They wouldn't be the cows or the horses or whatever, right? These would be like your dog or your cat sort of thing. Predominantly
the dog or cat, yes. But it would also include, we have feed for horses and you name it, right? So, but predominantly it was the dog and cat food that went on a big run early on. Yeah, so we were surprised as well, but it makes sense. Our farmers take care of their animals, including their pets.
Right.
We've since installed now plexi barriers in each of our locations to separate our staff and members. We've introduced social distancing measures, including sort of signage at the stores to set the rules for entry into the store, and maintaining safe distances within the store. Limiting the number of members and customers in stores, another avenue we've gone down. And most recently, we introduced one-way aisles to control the traffic within the stores. We actually canceled our retail flyer because we didn't want to drive excessive traffic into the store. We're now looking at reintroducing a digital flyer because people still want to plant their gardens and buy household items and that kind of thing. So we're going to reintroduce the digital flyer, but again, we're just not trying to drive a lot of traffic to the stores. And we have actually managed to secure a number of good deals from our suppliers that we do want to pass on to our members. We've altered our store hours, so we open a little later and we close a little earlier, mainly so we can clean and disinfect the stores and get ready for sort of the next day. And then most recently, we actually introduced a tailgate pickup service. And so what that is somebody can call us up on our 1-800 number, or in some cases to certain stores, and basically place their order via the phone and come to our farm and ranch store, stop in the parking lot at a designated stall, and we'll deliver the product right out to the box of their truck or their vehicle, and place it in the vehicle without ever having interaction with the member or the customer.
So Bob, some of what you're describing is kind of pretty, a lot of people are doing these things, right? Like, so for example, the arrows and the plexiglass, but some of this is particular to your line of business and to your structure. So that this pickup, the tailgate pickup, that sounds like a really neat idea I hadn't heard of before. How are you coming up with ideas? Like, some of this you might be taking from just it's out there, but some of this sounds like it's tailored to your members. Where did those ideas come from?
We are watching what others are doing, and we are following kind of suit. But at the same time, when you're in the country and your employee base is coming from a small population, you kind of have to ad lib, if you will, and sort of put nuances on this kind of stuff. And so that's essentially what we've been doing, is just trying to do what makes sense in each of the different locations and try to come up with a standard playbook for rural Western Canadians.
Are your members, what's the feedback been like from your members around these measures?
Very positive. We actually had, and this goes to the farm and ranch store itself, right? It's kind of at the heart of the local communities. They were doing tailgate pickup before we introduced tailgate pickup.
Oh, wow.
Like a member will call up and they'll know somebody in the store because it is a small town, and they'll say, "Hey, I'm just not comfortable coming in. Can you charge my credit card and just bring it out to me?" And because they know each other, the staff will usually say yes, right? We'll go do that for you. So I've heard of a number of instances for that, and so some of it happened organically as well, right? Where we were already seeing this happening, and so we just sort of formalized the process.
Right. Bottom up innovation, which is
exactly right from the ground, the grassroots.
Yeah, you mentioned something else I just want to pick up on. I told you this would be a conversation, Bob, so here we go.
Yeah, no worries.
You mentioned that you were passing through some of the savings you were getting from your input suppliers, or some of the products you were buying to sell back to your members. Tell me a bit about that, because that's interesting too. I mean, that's what you would kind of expect a co-op to be doing on behalf of its members. Tell us, can you just kind of elaborate a little bit on that process?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're here to serve our members, and we have heard of stories of organizations price gouging or raising their prices, and we've kept our pricing consistent, and we operate for our members and for our customers, and they expect us to continue to do so and continue to operate normally, even though, or as normal as possible in a pandemic. So we've kept our pricing consistent.
Yeah, that's great. You also mentioned you had this business continuity plan, and of course it didn't anticipate, I don't think anyone's did, this kind of event. But what would you take away from that? You had a plan, some elements were really applicable, it sounds like, some maybe not so much, but what have you learned from this process relative to your continuity plan as you had it before? What would you change about it?
Well, first off, I'd say that we actually had a reasonably good continuity plan in the first instance.
Okay.
It really did let us, or catapult us, to an early start and some fast reactions. So that's just good planning coming in. But at the end of the day, no plan is perfect. So for instance, we had thresholds of 30%. If you had 30% of your staff out at a particular location, then you started to move into sort of the next phase of the continuity plan and taking the next step. And I'll walk you through some of the levels, and this may make more sense in about a minute or so. But for us, what we found is with COVID, because it's got such a long long incubation period, and the fact that you can show symptoms without, or sorry, you can be you can pass on the illness without necessarily showing symptoms, because it's so contagious as well, it forced us into reacting differently and quicker, and not waiting for that 30% of staff to be sick. So as soon as you have one staff member sick, potentially you've got a whole bunch of them sick, right? And so in the farm stores, we have plans that if somebody gets sick, we isolate them, obviously. We try to isolate those who are in contact with them, but in a small community, it's probably going to be most of our store. And so in that case, if for whatever reason our store was forced to be isolated, we've got a plan in place to not close the store. What we would do is bring in staff from outside of the community and operate with a skeleton staff for that store. And it would only be in a situation where we would have multiple stores that were closed, where we'd be forced to actually close a store. And we've actually adapted as well just recently. So we've had about 3 of our communities right now where there have been some significant outbreaks of the COVID-19 virus, and we're preemptively locking the doors to the store just to protect our staff, but we will remain open. And so the way we're remaining open is we're going to offer the tailgate service only at those locations for a period of about 2 or 3 weeks while the outbreak continues in those areas. And as soon as it starts to subside, we'll reopen the store for the public. But in the interim, to protect everybody, we'll just offer the tailgate service. And ultimately, as an essential service, it's our job to try to find ways to remain open for our members and customers, and not shut our stores, right? And so that's been our response, and that's the kind of adaptation that we've had to do in order to remain open in a rural community.
So, I mean, you really are an essential service. I mean, there's some services where you might, as a lay person sitting outside in his downtown Saskatoon home, you might say, it doesn't sound essential. But when you're talking about food supply, it doesn't get much more essential than that. How have your conversations been like with, have you had any conversations with policymakers in Alberta or federally around what you're doing and how important it is to kind of keep those services active even when there's these kind of outbreaks?
Yeah, our interactions with government have been really positive. We've had lots of interaction. In particular, the government of Alberta has asked us to sit on a number of panels and advisory committees, as well as asked for our input on a number of issues throughout the pandemic. In fact, our president and CEO, Scott Bolton, chairs the Agriculture and Forestry Table that provides advice to the Premier's Economic Recovery Council. We were also recently asked to attend a meeting relating to the lack of personal protective equipment, or PPE, for the agriculture industry. With all the PPE being directed to the medical profession, there was a lack of PPE available for farmers. And this was a particular issue for us recently. We just announced last week that we donated 4,800 N95 masks to Alberta Health Services for the fight against the virus, which we believe was the right thing to do. But it was not easy to do because our members also required those masks on the farms. They provide protection against chemicals, fine particulate and dust, and the Hantavirus. And our members need them, but at this point in time, the government still has indicated that the medical profession needs it more. And so, we donated those masks to the government, and now we're actually, in turn, working with the government so that we can secure this type of PPE for the farmers and ranchers who are also providing those essential services.
So Bob, this is another interesting thread that I don't know anything about. But so you mentioned this Hantavirus. I don't know what that is, and this idea that it wouldn't have occurred to me that farmers would be that you would be supplying farmers in normal course these kinds of masks. So can you talk a bit about that? This is something that is not uncommon then for farmers to have using these kinds of masks in day-to-day life. Is that fair to say?
Well, yeah. Farmers deal all the time with chemicals. So they need the masks for chemicals. The Hantavirus is a virus that is my understanding is it's transmitted via mouse droppings. And so, you're in rural Alberta, rural Saskatchewan, rural BC, you're going to have mice, right? And so I understand it's actually a fairly severe virus if you contract it. Thankfully, the risk of transmission is low, but if you get it, it can be quite serious and deadly, is my understanding. And then just even the fine particulates in grain, like if you're working in a grain bin, you're going to be exposed to that fine particulate, and that can be very challenging for a lot of people. And so these N95 masks are quite important for farmers. And so ultimately we're trying to sorry, I'm not sure what happened there, Marc-Andre, but
that was my son. So. I've tried to help them to stay away, but every now and then.
No worries. This is part of the whole adaptation. I'm in my basement, right? And so we're all kind of learning to work from home. In fact, I had a board meeting where just before I turned on the video camera, our cat walked right across the video. and I was like, okay, what do? I've got to be on. So I turned online right away, right after that. And thankfully he didn't walk across it again. So, but we've had all sorts of situations like that. We've had, people working from home with their kids in their laps, and they're on a meeting, right? And we're all just adapting to the situation.
Sure. It kind of
understandable.
Gives a more human face to the work world, that's for sure, right? Like a little
exactly. Work. Yeah, exactly.
So back to this mass. I mean, this is something that I read the paper a lot. I kind of try to stay on top of things, but you don't read a lot about this. I mean, so I'm really happy that you're sharing this farmer perspective on things, because it's like I say again, generally we don't know. People like me wouldn't know that masks are kind of a normal part of life on a farm, and that it's really interesting that UFA and presumably your members were generally supportive of this. I mean, you probably didn't have a chance to sound them out, but what's been the response from members on this decision?
Yeah, the response has been very positive. We do have members who are in what I'll say is really tough circumstances where their masks or their number of masks are running low, and we recognize that. But even then, those members generally are supportive. They recognize that the medical profession is on the front line of a very contagious and deadly virus. They're still wanting us to advocate on their behalf that they do need some of these masks as well in order to operate and operate safely, especially for their employees, which that's who they're concerned about primarily. Yeah. I've heard of farmers rationing these masks, and that's a tough situation for them to be in. Having to choose whether one of their employees gets a mask for a dangerous situation versus not. It's not dangerous enough to give you my limited supply of these masks. So that's a really awkward position for the farmers to be in. But generally they've been very supportive. From a cooperative perspective, that's the beauty of a cooperative, is we're all in this together, right? And our farmers recognize that and have been very supportive, and they've been pushing us to advocate on their behalf as well, to get some of these masks authorized for distribution to them. So
I want to pick up on this this theme of you've been working with government and your members have been supportive. It's a really interesting moment where you're playing a policy role effectively, and both from a kind of essential service perspective, but also because you have this supply of masks. Are there any other areas where you've been, where that kind of policy dimension has been playing out in this crisis for UFA, or maybe not, but I'm just curious if there are any other.
Yeah, that's the biggest one. There was one situation early on, which you're probably familiar with because it did make the papers, and it wasn't just related to us, but it was initially closing bathrooms. Yeah, I don't know if you've heard about this one, but if you think about the supply chain, especially on our fuel side. So we initially closed our bathrooms just like everybody else did early on. And then the people who transport didn't have anywhere to go to the washrooms, right? And we recognized our mistake right away. We had reversed our policy decision within a day, just because it was the right thing to do. And then not only, as soon as we had done that, about a couple days later, we had the Premier of Alberta on the TV saying, people, please reopen your washrooms. These people are providing essential services. They need places to stop to use the washroom. They shouldn't be forced to go and stop on the side of the road and have to, yeah. Anyway, so we reversed our course right away. We knew it was the right thing to do. We knew from a public policy perspective, because our distribution network was so large, that we really did have to reopen the washrooms for everyone. And so we did right away and recognized our mistake. And I have to say, our members and our customers were very pleased with us. We got a lot of response back from them saying, hey, we recognize you made a mistake at the outset, but you quickly reversed course and you apologized for it. And not a lot of companies were doing that at the time. So we were a little bit ahead of the game on that one too. So.
And how, Bob, how are farmers doing generally? I mean, that's a little off topic, but I can't help but ask it because it's such again, it's essential service. And people are wondering what's going on out there in terms of that supply chain. What are you seeing or hearing? And maybe also just a not unrelated question, but we've seen oil prices completely collapse last few weeks. How is that all playing out? And then maybe last question. I'm throwing a lot at you here, but I can't help it. I want to get it all out. There's also this question of people like farm labor, and I don't know how big a deal that is in Alberta. I know in Ontario and Quebec and BC it is, but is that also playing out? And do you have a role in any of this? Whether it be farm labor or oil prices, obviously supply of fuel, but how does that all shake out for you as an organization that's working with farmer owners?
Well, for us, primarily our role, I'll start with that. Primarily our role is one of advocacy, for the farmer. We have been a strong voice in agriculture within Western Canada. And, we are listened to by the various governments in Western Canada. And so when we see issues like this, it's our job to advocate on our members and customers' behalf and, make sure that the powers that be are aware of the issues that are going on and trying to provide solutions and ideas for solutions to resolve the issues. I'll maybe talk first about the crop side on the agricultural piece. Actually, maybe I'll talk about farmers in general first off. The last few years have had some difficult years for farmers. We've had late and rainy or wet harvests where crop has been in the field or been left in the field and not been able to been taken off in the fall time frame. That's put farmers in a really difficult situation financially. And so, it's been the last couple of years have been very tough on them from that perspective. So, farmers heading into this pandemic have sort of been a little bit behind the eight ball. And, credit's been a bit tighter for a lot of them, just because, finances have been a little more difficult. So, we've been advocating on behalf of our farmers that, credit has to be extended to them in order to get these crops in. And in fact, actually crops off from last year before they can get the crops in for this year for some of them. And that just highlights the state on the crop side. But generally, I think the crop side this year is okay at this stage. The supply chain appears to be holding up fairly well. We've got ample supply for our members and customers, and we really haven't run out of anything in significance, that the farmers need, other than maybe the masks that we talked about earlier. On the cow-calf side, you've probably seen in the media that there's been outbreaks at two of the major processing plants in Alberta, at the Cargill plant in High River and the JBS plant in Brooks. Those are obviously significant issues for the cattle producers and meat production. in Western Canada. We can't have those sites down very long, but they've got pretty significant outbreaks at this point in time, which will impact cattle producers and other producers within the Western provinces if it goes on for an extended period. So that's not a very good situation at this point in time. On the oil and gas side, our network is usually a good indicator of oil and gas activity within Western Canada. And we've seen a significant drop in fuel volumes, as you'd expect, with sort of cutback in capital investment in Western Canada, and with the low prices of oil that our Western Canadian companies are getting, it's really difficult for them. So in both systems, in both the agricultural system and the oil and gas side, they both need liquidity, I think, in short order here, in order to ensure survival of all of the industries that we deal with.
So this maybe I'll start wrapping up, Bob. But this kind of advocacy role is really interesting. I don't think, and in particular, I think of the students at the Johnson Shoyama Policy School. They may not appreciate just how much an organization like yours interfaces with policymakers. So you got the masks. You've got the lines of credit as an important issue to keep farmers going out and the supply chains alive. Are there any other issues that you're bringing to the table that would be interesting to share with the audience? There may not be.
I think I've covered actually most of the big issues, right?
Yeah.
At this, we're always dealing with smaller issues here and there. We have a government relations committee of our board, and we identify issues throughout our agricultural network, and we bring those forward. But really, I think I've talked about and discussed the really truly significant issues of the day.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't something that we were leaving off.
Yeah.
No, it's fascinating. I mean, especially for me in the kind of policy kind of mindset, I just find this super interesting. And the fact that you're getting your input from your members. I mean, that's an interesting aspect of all this from a cooperative perspective, is your members are informing directly how you kind of advocate, what you advocate for. Is there anything else, Bob? Maybe you can talk a bit about, I think one of my original questions was just about what's your cooperative structure is doing for you or not in this event. Is it how it's different or not? You've already touched on some of this, the responsiveness to members, but in terms of the governance process itself, is there anything? Have you had board meetings? And I imagine, in this crisis, and what have those conversations look like? And I know you can't tell us everything, but just a sense of how you're getting that feedback from your members. Is it through largely the board and phone calls, or how does that work exactly? How do you?
Yeah. So our structure is one of where we've got our members who elect delegates, and we've got 42 districts currently, and they elect 11 board members. And so we regularly meet with both our delegate body and get input from them, as well as our board of directors. Throughout the process, we've had a number of meetings with our board in particular. It's easier to get a smaller group together, but we have all the way through obtained information and input from our delegate body as well. But our board's been meeting fairly regularly. We were meeting on a weekly basis for the last few weeks, and are now moving more into a period of stability. And so we've moved into more monthly type meetings after the most recent board meeting we just had this last Tuesday. But I do want to speak to some of the advantages of the cooperative structure, because I think one of our major advantages through all of this has been the loyalty of our membership. They continue to support us during the pandemic, and obviously we in turn support them by providing the goods and services they need, and we're all essential. Many of our members, which this is a bit of a surprise to me, but many of our members really do like to invest back in the cooperative. And I guess it shouldn't be that much of a surprise. it's just more of a surprise during a pandemic where you sort of anticipate people wanting to hoard their cash or keep cash on hand. But we have a member investment program where our members loan us money on a 3 or a 5 or a 7-year term. And even during this crisis, we have already renewed a majority of the loan program coming due this year. So this year we had $15 million of loans coming due, and we've already renewed 13 million of that. And it just goes to show that the power of the cooperative, the power of the membership, to provide us with this liquidity in a time of crisis. This helps us keep our balance sheet strong. It allows us to emerge from the financial crisis in a strong position, which in turn then will give us advantages over other businesses. And as we all sort of emerge post-pandemic, and so it's really powerful, actually.
Bob, it's remarkable actually, because I've been having conversations with folks in the credit union sector, and they've been doing similar stories, but there is, in the banking sector, there's a general concern that people in bond markets, there's been general liquidity problems, not in the banking sector per se, but in the bond markets. We've seen people not wanting to buy provincial debt, for example, or Newfoundland had a scare in March. And so there's just this general concern about liquidity. And in the midst of this crisis, your co-op is pulling in, the loans are coming, people are putting money back in. It's remarkable in the context. It's remarkable normally, but it's even more remarkable now. So yeah, that's worth an academic study, I think.
So, and I'll tell you, like, the other piece of all of this is we paid patronage this year. We paid 14.1 million, in fact, out to our members this year. We were in a strong position to begin with, but we felt that after the last few harvests that the membership would need this money, especially after sort of the early snows, and so we paid the patronage. We took steps to defer our employee bonuses and our salary increases this year just to keep us financially strong and pay this amount, and then to see our members kind of rally behind us, right, as well, with 15 million of liquidity is just, it's amazing the way the cooperative system works. Like, we gave back to the members that we believe needed it. Our employees and our executive took deferred the bonuses and deferred salary increases, and then the members come in rallying behind. Like, we're in a very strong financial position coming into this pandemic, and I'm certain it'll carry through right to the end.
Well, that's so. Just to be clear, Bob, were those decisions taken around the deferrals and the patronage? Were they taken? When were they taken? When were those taken?
Right when the pandemic hit.
Okay.
So literally, right at the outset, I'm just trying to think of the timeline here, but it was about, I think it was March 12th or so, where we decided to close our office, our central support office. Our annual general meeting was, I think, the Friday, the next day. And that's where we were going to declare patronage. We ended up postponing that. And we ended up having a special meeting about, I'd say, 2 weeks later, where, and this is right in the thick of the early stages of the pandemic, our delegate body, our board of directors all recommended paying the patronage to the membership, just to make sure that we took care of our members.
Well, I think that's a wonderful note to end on from my questioning anyway, Bob. Do you have anything you want to add? I think this has been, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think we could go on. I have always too many questions, but I don't want to stretch the patience of the listener. So, Bob, is there anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
No, you know what? I think I've probably said enough. I think I've covered everything that I'd like to cover. It's just, at the end of the day, the power of the cooperative, I think, is highlighted in the fact that we've paid patronage and our members have continued to invest in us, and we're there for each other. Essentially, it's the power of the cooperative.
Bob Fink, thank you so much for this, for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know you're extremely busy, and really grateful, and I hope people get something, a lot out of this like I did. Thank you again.